The Spanish Empire in the early part of the 19th century had not been the subject of the best of experiences, to say the least. Starting out as an ally of France, that had of course led to a good chunk of the fleet being captured or destroyed by the British. Then the French had invaded Spain, which led the Spanish to, rather understandably, decide to switch sides. But that had been followed up with dissent and rebellion in the South American colonies, which had not only dragged on for quite a while after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, but also ended with those areas achieving independence, denying Spain much of the income that it had for centuries used to fund its various activities. Between this and the Peninsular Campaign, doing a fair amount of damage to the mainland of Spain itself, it is perhaps understandable that no further ships of the line were built in Spanish dockyards for the first half of the 19th century. But by the 1850s, it was felt that the fleet could afford, and needed, at least a couple of modern ships of the line. And so the old drawings for the San Ildefonso class of 74 gunners were pulled out of storage to be used as the basis for some new ships. The plans were enlarged, adding almost 30 feet to the length of the older design, and this would make the new ships capable of carrying 86 guns. They were named Reina Don Isabella II and Rey Don Francisco de Asís, after the current King and Queen of Spain. The main battery consisted of 32-pounder guns, which were spread across both gun decks, with 18 68-pounders so included, and a small number of 12-pounder guns and bronze carronades on the upper decks, although the exact numbers and therefore ratios of all of these guns, apart from the 68-pounders, differ depending on your source. The carronades were replaced with a couple more 12-pounders later on in their career. Not only the exact ratio of the different types of guns, but the overall numbers of guns and exactly where the heavy guns were positioned also varied slightly depending on which ship you were looking at. The Isabella II was laid down at La Carraca on the south coast in 1850, while the Francisco was laid down the following year in Ferrol on the northern coast. Launched in 1852 and 1853 respectively, and each commissioned about a year later, by 1855, with the advent of steam-powered battleships elsewhere in the world, it was briefly considered to convert the Francisco by installing an auxiliary steam engine, but this was soon cancelled on cost grounds. Both ships would see a limited amount of action in the 1859 to 1860 edition of the Spanish Wars with Morocco, although the Isabella II would see most of this action of the two. Since Morocco was rather lacking in the naval department, the fleet's activities were largely limited to shore bombardment and convoying troop transports, with the Isabella II taking a couple of hits in return from shore guns in a couple of operations. She also saw a degree of slightly more active combat by providing covering fire along with the rest of the Spanish fleet at the Battle of Tetuan, which would be the last major action of that particular war. After this, however, both ships were quickly relegated to being school ships. A number of armoured vessels were under construction for the Spanish Navy, and a sailing ship of the line with a high manpower requirement and no steam engine was not seen as a wise investment of limited resources going forward. And so, after a couple of prestige voyages with the royal family, both were decommissioned for their new uses. The Rey Don Francisco de Asís would only last in this role for a few years, being finally decommissioned and then broken up in 1866. But Reina Don Isabella II survived a similar fate for a while by being turned into a pontoon in 1867, a role in which she outlived the reign of the queen she was named for, as the Spanish royal family was dethroned the next year in 1868 by a rebellion that kicked off, of all things, in the navy. The ship then remained at Cartagena for the next 2 decades, and then, when news finally came in of its sail for breaking up, it promptly sank at its moorings, which forced something of a pause in proceedings while they worked out how to refloat it, and she was finally sent to the breakers in 1889, marking the passing of the last great sailing warship of the Spanish Armada.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.